So my job is to go over the documents, and this could be a real downer after hearing all these exciting things, but I'm just going to touch on some things and point you in the right direction. All right, so elements of success. Before we get into the actual designs, for a typical contest, these are some things that you have to have. Sheer talent, which we've got a lot of in this room. Acquired skills, rooms full of parts, right, so that you can build with, and the knowledge of the program that you're going to be submitting something for. For this, it's a little bit different. The main thing here is that instead of rooms full of parts, you can still use these if you want, but ultimately you'll need to submit the stuff through Studio. And so one of the acquired skills we're thinking for a lot of folks is going to be their ability to use Studio. There's things on Studio that are brand new that no one has ever used, so it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve here, and we think though that we're going to actually get more people with this than if we depend on people with tons and tons of parts, or at least there's going to be a better experience for people who may not have access to something like this. But the thing we're going to talk about in my session today here is the knowledge of the program. We want you to know about the program before you start investing your time and your thoughts and energy in building, because if you go off in a different direction, your design may not be selected, and otherwise maybe it could have. We're really not trying to keep out designs. We're trying to get as many eligible designs as possible. We think that is best. So we have 3 documents. We have terms of service, selection criteria, and the frequently asked questions. This document here is growing. It's sort of something that will develop. We might even take some things out of it, but these are fairly fixed, and you want to go over them all. They're all accessible from one page. If you go to BrickLink, there's a red button up here called Studio, and you go to the crowd project. There's a big page that talks about the whole program, and this is at the bottom, close to the bottom of the page, this thing called.
Also,
Yes?
a little louder.
A little louder?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Let me move over here. So what we would like you to do is to go into the middle of one of these, and actually, if you have your phone and you want to look at it right now, you can too, but this is mostly for the benefit of people online who want to look it up later. If you click on here, you will get a long document of selection criteria broken into 5 segments. If you go further down the page, you'll get to what we call the FAQs, frequently asked questions. If you click on one of these, it opens up a whole bunch of questions underneath. And if you don't see a question, if you've looked through all of this, you can post in our Studio forum, and this is a link that will take you over there. So the frequently asked questions is really a flexible thing. There's many questions that may not be so frequently asked that we want you to ask. If you have someone asked recently if they could receive payment in a form other than PayPal. So that's looking way, way into the future. And maybe no one else has that question, but that person did. So this is why we have a way of doing even the not so frequently asked questions. At the very bottom of the FAQs on this same page, this is what the questions look like all broken down. Where can I see the full terms of service? Now, you have to agree to these when you submit a design, right? But it's like many of those other terms of service things, you have to click it in order to get to the next page, and it's just this big scrolling amount of text. But there's a lot of stuff in here that people really should read, and so we put this here so that people can refer to it. And you just have to click here, and it'll bring you up to a different page. It's all very clear in black and white. So we're going to go through these documents one at a time. In terms of service, this is actually the whole thing in a big long list. And the only thing I'm going to focus on right here is this one for today, but it's all good to read. And there's, of course, legalese and everything in there, but it's good to read that. The crowdfunding, this has to do with money, and it shows you what Marvin had mentioned, the limit of, the threshold of $10,000, and it shows you how to sort of calculate that for different kinds of set values. And says down here, sales price of each A-Fall designer set will be determined by BrickLink, but you can sort of tell, it's a really big set, the range is from $20 to $200. You can tell with part count sort of where it's gonna fall in there if you need to calculate some things. The next section over here is sales, and this is sort of the same thing, except the sales period, of course, comes after the crowdfunding period. The big thing here is a limit of 2,500 total things, and of course, you could have 2,500 in the crowdfunding period. That would be great, but these are the limits for this. And then here at the end, we have the designer fee, which, as Marvin has pointed out, is 10%. Okay, and what we would like you to do is go through and crunch the numbers on this so you can see actually how much to invest in terms of what you can get out of it. This is the minimum amount if you had a very small set, $10,000, okay, and then crowdsourcing, we're thinking it would be almost impossible to fully crowdfund a set and no one bought it afterwards. So there's going to be a range here of probably the same amount. So minimum total sales for the maximum or the minimum size of set would probably yield this in terms of what you would your payout would be. If we go on to the maximum, this is produced quantity, highest set value that we're going to allow, and maximum total sales would then be that, and then you can do the math when you go here. That's 10% of what that is. So that's the range that you're in. And the reason I'm bringing this up right now is because I think it's very helpful if people have a target in mind and think through this before they decide what kind of design or designs. You can submit multiple things and try different areas. So I think this is good to look at so that we don't end up with, most of the submissions being at the $200 range, or even at another thing. We're trying to get a balanced portfolio of sets from this program. And this is how you motivate yourself. Now, of course, we just talked about the financial things, but anytime you win something like this, it's a wonderful motivation, and it boosts your sense of worth in the LEGO community. And I think that the reason I put this on here is because every time I hear a graduation ceremony and people get all these awards for things, I'm thinking, why didn't I think about this when I was in the library at midnight trying to get something done? So, selection criteria. This is sort of a very detailed document, and I've got the text up here, but if you want to look at it on your phone, you're very welcome to. This is probably the most important thing in terms of actually what you're doing. We're going to go from back to front. So this is the last section in this document. Put your best foot forward. This is a submission we actually received. This is the view that the admins have of what comes in, and I blacked out all the personal information. We get to see an image, a little bit of text, and of course we can access the files and take a look. But that's pretty much it. So if you want to put your best foot forward, it's a great idea to have some explanation here and to get a very nice picture. We ask that you not just do screenshots, but actually take the time to render the image. And the more images, it just helps, okay? And then here, this is what happens if you don't get selected. And unfortunately, we've had to archive some things almost immediately because, like in this case, there was almost nothing there. So everything's going to get archived at some point except for the very final winning entries. It's just that these kinds of things get archived immediately, and it's just, I don't know if people think they're going to win. We can't communicate with people once they've done that. Community is important. This is actually sort of a list of no-nos that you could say are not allowed in the program, but we've framed it a little bit differently because the real reason for this is because we want these sets to be accepted by a very large community. So here we have ADP is sort of floating out to the side. The goal is to have this come right into the center. And you might say, well, if I have a set that a lot of people will buy, not everyone has to buy that. But we're really in this ADP thing altogether. So if someone has a set that has something in it that's offensive, it sort of colors the whole program, and that whole bubble moves outside. So this is the big one here. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think everyone would agree on here. The big one here that we've already had some feedback on is the military things, the warfare or war vehicles. And of course, this would not be accepted. It's just, and this is the rule here. This is warfare or war vehicles in any modern present-day situation or national war memorials. Now, that doesn't give any dates, so you take a look here. This is a set actually that was produced by Lego. I built it before. It's a beautiful set. This is from World War I. So now we can't say that just because Lego has produced a set in the past that we would accept it for this program. I mean, basically the rules are the same, but we can't really say that for sure. But for argument's sake, we've got something here that maybe would be accepted, but this over here wouldn't be. And then there's this big area in between. And people are free to try to submit whatever they want. The problem is that even if something were to be more on this side and could be submitted, it's an extra level of complication. So if we've got a bunch of designs that we can pick from, and it's down to 2, and one of them has an issue and one of them doesn't, it's just easier to go with the one that doesn't, especially with the time frame that we have. So we just recommend people not to, to stay away from getting close to the lines on things.
What about the future world?
Future wards, well, I didn't put examples in there for that, but that's one of those things too, Lego does not implement the Halo game models for a reason, and so that's one of those things that I think is probably a gray area. This is modern, but I think by the time you start to get fussing in with the details of this, it's like, the battle is lost, so to speak. Element constraints. This is actually Duplo, and there's no Duplo in there, but one of the problems that we have is that everything is supposed to be an active Lego element, and we've taken care of most of that by using the Studio software to filter out models that don't, or just actually to give you the pieces that you can use. But there are some things that you can do as a builder. Here's one about Lego minifigures. You can have no more than one for 250 pieces. But the main thing I want to get here is to contain a balanced element composition, and obviously this could be considered a work of art by some folks to have, these patterns and things like this. But it's not balanced, right? One piece all the way through. Building experience. One of my other loves besides Lego is building puzzles. One of the things I found that there is a point at which you stop enjoying something. And, this is actually a real review from somebody on Amazon. It said this puzzle is so close to rage quit level hard. Now, the only problem is that this is a review for the 500-piece version of this puzzle. There were no reviews for this one. So we want to make it fun for people to build. I've tried to do things like this before, and I've failed a few times. So one of the great things about this is the number of pieces that you actually have when you use Studio. And right here's a sort of how we came up with moving these elements into Studio. And we have 10,000 elements. Now that may go up or down. And that includes different colors, but that's still a lot, I don't know how many folks have that many parts available to them. The other thing you can do is, with building instructions, Studio, you can put the steps in there, and that really helps us if you have ideas with that. But like Marvin said, we don't want to really go in and change a lot of things. So if you can do things like this, see, this car is completely gray on the outside, but inside it's got all these different colored pieces, and this helps when you build things. It really does. And so if you can think about that, that may be the difference between your design being accepted and another one being accepted. I don't know how many builders actually think about this kind of thing when they build stuff for conventions. Probably not, because you just build with whatever you have. But this is a consideration that maybe in the time between now and November 18th you could maybe learn about or try out. And then the last piece here in this section here, creativity, diversity, originality. We've already talked about quite a bit of this. And I've got an image of Mozart here, who was, of course, considered to be a very creative person. The thing I want to sort of point out is that we've talked about originality and we've really emphasized diversity, but that doesn't mean, well, creativity as a word can be taken in many different ways. Sometimes people say, you know, just do the assignment and don't get creative, you know, because that means going outside the lines. This doesn't mean that you do something wild, you know, and I think that people may interpret it that if you think that, well, it's got to be in a theme that no one's ever seen before. There is a stream in there of new things. And of course, the other reason I put Mozart in here is, if you know anything about classical music, he was a fellow who was operating at a time where there were tremendous constraints. I mean, there were rules about everything. And even though there was all that there, he was still extremely original and was able to be creative and diverse and all that stuff within that system. And his musical examples are models even until this day. Now we'll move on to the third document here, the FAQ. If you go to the studio forum, you'll see that FAQs are actually duplicated over there. We have all of them in sort of a long format that if you wanted to print out, it would probably be easiest to do over here. But there's also a part of the studio forum where you can go in and it's like a forum. You can give suggestions to other people who want to have ideas. You can have, if there's problems with the studio and you learning it, you can have all kinds of, it's basically any question that you don't find here, you can ask there. And I say there, but it's just around the corner. It's really the same thing. And of course, this whole gathering right here is sort of an extension that's trying to make this into a more useful document for everyone. And we're going to try to use some of the questions and comments we have here to add to this FAQ list. We take it very seriously. All right, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.